it does take time, like educating, building community, building relationships that are genuine takes time, and that takes patience. I really believe that when we are working to lead and guide the flow, the pathway of society, of community, that we have to be willing to sit in conversations with people whose values may not align with ours. And we have to do so with humility and listening, which is hard. I mean, I feel like I'm in a safe space of folks that have experienced this, but when you're facing someone has a lot of privilege and their values don't look like yours, it is so hard to say, okay, I'm coming from a place of grounded humanity and I am listening to you so that I understand how to talk to you and how to get you to understand what's really going on in the bigger picture. So I think learning and listening and patience.
So how do we, and I agree with you. I find that sometimes some of our activist friends are very impatient, and it's as somebody who studied conflict resolution, it is an onion that you have to unpeel. And I'm a big fan of attraction versus detraction, right? And where is the common ground? And I find that relating it to their individual experience, like, well, wouldn't you want your children to have XYZ? Wouldn't you want your parents to have XX to XYZ or ABC? I'm asking for the same thing, right? And it's at that moment that I find the light bulb goes off of like, oh, that's what you're asking for, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're asking for safety and security. You're asking
Yes.
for to be able to have something to hand down to your children. You're asking
Yes.
for, yes, those are all those. And so my question to you is, how do we, what are the markers, or what are the ways that we can be patient, however, not be satisfied with equity on layaway, right?
Yeah. Yep.
To use Martin Luther King's words,
yes.
We're not interested in equity on layaway. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think persistence and resilience are key. And I don't use those words lightly. Like, again, I've already said it is hard to be patient. It is hard to bounce back and have that persistence. But since you brought up Martin Luther King, I'm just gonna like share a quick story that I think of to that question. So, raised suburb of Chicago, my mother was in middle school when the civil rights movement was starting. And she used to tell me the story about how the first time Martin Luther King Jr. came to Chicago, like the very first time he came to Chicago, Black folks in Chicago were not having it. They were not down with this message of nonviolence. They were not down with it. And what I like about that, just knowing that and knowing that from my mom's firsthand witnessing, I love that because we know he came back to Chicago. And we know that when he came back, people were ready for the message. And so I think that that's really the key to persistence, is not every moment is for everyone, and recognizing when to step away and say, like, we're not enemies, but I'm gonna like give you your space, and I'm gonna go over here and talk to this group of people or talk to this person, but I'm gonna come back to you because I don't want to leave you behind.
And it's so funny because I've got my own little story about that. So when I'm also a transplant, I'm originally from Los Angeles, and when I moved here, my second job here, after being here about 3 years, I started a job at Native Americans in Philanthropy. I was told basically after I was hired that there were people that the ED shared with me, there are people who didn't want me to hire you. And I said, well, I'm used to that. Like, that's nothing new. I'm like, this is just a different context. And I said, but here's the thing. I said, to your point, I said, all I can do is keep showing up. All I can do is keep extending my hand and show up in the best way that I possibly can, to let people know that I actually really care about what happens to them, because I wouldn't want what happens to them to happen to my family. And if one of three things is going to happen, either one, they're going to be like, okay, she cool. All right, we'll mess with her, right? Two, they ain't going to be about it, but I will demonstrate results. And people like to associate with winners, whether they like you or not, right?
I know that's right.
Or three, they ain't gonna like you, they ain't never gonna like you, and I can't do anything about that. So, but you know what? They won't be able to say anything about me because I'm always going to show up in my best self. So I think those, what I'm hearing is kind of that same sort of message of, you definitely must, it is required. We must keep showing up, because trust also, it takes a long time. And that's all part of the collective power. You cannot have collective power without building that trust and investing. It's like a bank. You've got to make deposits and withdrawals, and your deposits need to be more than your withdrawals.
Yes.
So with that,
Absolutely.
I would love to shift a little bit to being in a leadership position as a Black woman. What are you feeling? And maybe there's nothing different, but what are you being called upon at this moment? Is it different? Is it more? Is it less? What are you seeing as Black women? Are you finding that you're being called that's different, or maybe not so different? Maybe it's doubling down. What are you seeing and feeling as you are growing and expanding your leadership?
Yeah, I think that I really think a lot about organizational culture, and essentially, it's like we're talking about taking people with us, and it's just really important that every element, every aspect of an organization is, we're all kind of moving together. And so I think for a lot of folks they're thinking about DEI, and I'm thinking about things like self-reflection and just kind of like the honesty that comes with that, regardless of the body that you walk in. That ultimately makes you a better person, which makes you better at your work. We don't always show up as our best selves, but what does it look like to be someone that does have the capacity to self-reflect and to then move forward stronger? And so I really think about that a lot. I think about organizational culture a lot. And I think about, the organization's 26 years old. It's only had white male leadership. And so I think a lot about how things were done in the past and the sort of impetus for those decisions, and really look at pathways and how the work can have a more comprehensive flow, a more connected flow to the desires and drives of the community. And I'll just give a really direct example. So like I said at the beginning, we focus on dignified, affordable housing for rental as well as affordable home ownership. And historically, those two things have been completely separate programs in the organization. And recognizing again the freedom, the liberation that comes with homeownership for those that desire it, right? Understanding it's not for everyone, and that's okay. But for those that desire it, that it's up to us to help create a pathway, and to be creative. So mainstream homeownership isn't going to work for everyone, and honestly, it wasn't intended to. So what does it look like to collaborate, to partner with organizations that can help us create alternative pathways to homeownership? I really love the shared equity model. And again, that is something that Black folks initiated. This is like out of our history, the concept of a cooperative. And, it's not the only shared equity model. There are many out there, but I really look at that as a pathway to move. We have nearly 500 residents. And like I said, the pathway hasn't been laid out in the past at the organization. And so that's that's something that I think about a lot. I'm like constantly in that strategy as a leader. I don't know if that answered your question. I feel like I was maybe a little all over the place there.
You get to answer it however you want to answer it. But I'll take that point that you mentioned, because I think it's an important one, and I think it gets really lost in the DEI conversation, particularly with the example that you opened with of like, oh, this is the level of Black ownership, this is the level of white ownership. Not everybody wants to own a home, right? And what we call in the Native community, it's self-determination, that you get to choose and that you get to decide that you are in a position to choose and decide, because not everybody wants that, right? My grandmother, she was a rolling stone. She did not want anything holding her down anywhere, right? So, okay, that's cool. But you know what? She was very happy with her life. She's like, I work hard. I like nice things. I want to be able to buy nice things. And that's what's important to me. That's what makes me feel good. And it's like, okay, then like that you are in a position of power and autonomy and agency to be able to do that. Or if you want to get a house, that is also a pathway, and that you don't have all these false barriers doing that. I want to open it up for questions. Please put your questions in the chat. And while you're thinking about a question to put in the chat, I want to have one last question from me. And so this has been a heavy 18-24 months. And I think we don't talk about this enough. It's getting more space. But what is your self-care routine? What are you doing to take care of yourself?
That's such a nice question. Yeah, so I have to have physical exercise. And I definitely, in a very human way, will drop it, right? But that's key. Getting outside, getting away. I think I did not realize how much I value leaving here during the like the heart of COVID pandemic. And now I'm just like, whoa, I want to get away like every weekend. So yeah, and I just I do a lot of reading and listening, and just quiet space. So not always good at it. So I appreciate the question, because it's also a reminder. And then of course, my closest, my kin, they are everything through getting through this.
Awesome. We do have one quick question that before we move on. What is one way you think Black and Brown community members can work together differently and more deeply to address the affordable and accessible housing needs in our community?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. Well, I think we have to, kind of going back to what you said at the beginning, Elaine, about oppression Olympics, like we have to get out of that mindset, and recognize that, you know, we the collective benefits as we all move together, we're all benefiting. And I think being able to even really talk about reparations across Black and Brown identities is something that feels really important to me, for Black and Brown folks to be able to talk about what it looks like for all of us to have repair in our communities. And I think about land back. I think about, you know, again, everyone having access to that independence, that sovereignty, that justice. So I would love to see, you know, even within Urban Homeworks, I would love to see more partnerships with American Indian, Indigenous communities locally, ways that we can, for those in the urban setting, like how can we provide stable housing, because it's definitely an issue there as well.
Thank you. And I could chop it up with you all night long, but we have another wonderful guest. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your beauty, your experiences. It is so meaningful, and it's a privilege to speak with you. And there are certainly things I'm taking away from this conversation, and I hope all of you who are in internet land and watching us live are picking up and putting down. So thank you so much. We're going to be, given the time here, we're going to be moving on. Let's see. Thank you, Asole Sol, for being here with us this evening and sharing your reflections on community building and collective power for justice. We'll take a few minutes just to transition to our next speaker. So if folks need time to stretch and grab something to eat or drink, please do. We're going to start again. Oh, we've got a little bit of time. So it looks like we've got another question. So I'm going to put that up to you, Asole Sol. You were just talking about organizational culture and the importance of self-reflection showing up for other leaders of organizations, or for anyone who aspires to be an activist and contributor to movements for justice. how do you create a culture of self-reflection? What does that look like?
Oh, I love that. Yeah. So we build it into our professional development at the organization. We literally budget for it. So for example, we're doing work with the Cultural Wellness Center that has been really helpful with our entire staff. We also have a white body caucus within our organization that gives the white bodied folks within the work a space to ask questions and sort of make mistakes through a method of least harm. And we do it in a way that says that, you know, if a BIPOC staff wants to join that white caucus, they can at any time. And that the white bodied caucus is ultimately accountable to the BIPOC staff in the organization. So they have to do report out. So it's not just a space where folks can kind of just fall apart and not be accountable to anything and not have action or follow up. Yeah, and then literally we budget to do the work, and so it gets done.
I think that's really important. One of the things that we do as Social Impact Strategies Group is the month of July, we're closed to the public. And 2 weeks out of that, we're close. Like, and 2 weeks, we're actually, to your point, we're doing that self-reflection. We're like, okay, 6 months has gone by. These are the things we said we were going to do. What were we able to accomplish? What were we not able to accomplish? Why were we not able to accomplish them? Are they important that we didn't accomplish them? And then we do some forward thinking of like, okay, seeing everything that happened up until now, what do we need to adjust for the last half of the year? What makes sense? What should we take away? And so my team, and my organization is 5 years old, and we've been doing this every year for 5 years. Really appreciate that quiet time. And something that we've also implemented this year is we have what's called it's PTO week, I forget what it stands for now. I'm blanking, but it's a week where we do our level best to not schedule any outside appointments. It's our week to sort of catch our breath, to catch up, to be able, if there's something that's been nagging you that you're like, I just need like 3 hours to work on this thing and I can put it to bed, you now have that opportunity to do that. And then we do something similar in December. It's a little harder in December because it's year end, but I just knowing that there's a moment of quiet that's built in, our team really seems to really appreciate and to be able to have that time. And similar to you, we also budget in, hey, we will after our conference, everybody gets a spa day. So, you know, they work so hard for 3 months leading up to the conference. And so it's like, okay, we budgeted in, and we actually had to have a sort of a little bit of a knockdown drag out with our accountant. And I said, well, wait a minute. I'm sure you have clients who golf. And I'm sure that they write off, would this be a different conversation if this was a woman the woman accountant. I said, would this be a different conversation if I was saying that we were taking a golf trip or we were going golfing? Because it's a spa, like, is that the reason why you're now asking me about whether or not this can be applied as I call it professional development?
Yes, because that's what it is. Yeah, I would, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add that, you know, another way that we build that in is in our values. And so how we do evaluation, quarterly evaluation, a big part of that is self-care and self-reflection, as well as that sort of anti-racism work, that constant work. And so really it's just built into the fabric of the org. Elaine, I see one more question in the chat. Do you have
or would you give advice to non-BIPOC cultural groups who are interested in being allies for Black and Brown priorities?
Yeah, so I think the first step is to actually, like, who are you interested in partnering with and working with? Who are you interested in supporting? What work are you interested in supporting? And going directly to those groups to ask what kind of support they want and need from you. And really letting them dictate what what that looks like, how you show up, and trusting that they know exactly what they're doing. And so your role is to follow. And sometimes you'll be asked to lead because there are conversations that I think are very much white conversations. And there's work that's very much white work. But I think that when it's taken out of the context of actual Black and Brown leadership, then it can seem to sort of overshadow the work that we're doing. And so I think it's just really helpful to ask how you can be supportive.
Awesome. Well, do you have any sort of other last reflections or comments or inspirations that you would like to see from our communities as we continue to transition in this time after the Great Civil Awakening, as some people like to call it? What do you see as on the horizon, or what's your hope now that we've kind of had this breakdown, for lack of a better term? What is your greatest hope and dream or vision? Be more aspirational. What is your greatest vision for what comes next in the next what's the next 24 months bring?
I really, especially after the most recent elections in St. Paul and Minneapolis, I'm thinking a lot about the power of fear. And aspirationally, I would like to see us understand our fear with clarity, with honesty, and understand the ways that we don't have to let fear dictate our movement and our access of equitable communities, where everyone is safe and everyone is supported and everyone is stable. Yeah, that's what I'm holding.
And what do you think what are those fears? What do you think are those fears that people maybe are not necessarily identifying or naming or saying out loud? They may be saying it in the whispers of their mind, but they're not saying out loud.
Yeah, I think people are really afraid of the unknown, or what they don't know. Which again, as an educator, I go back to, just because you don't know or have context for something doesn't mean that there aren't others in other communities that do. I think about policing and the comfort that we have. We're accustomed to police, this notion of police in a particular way, and people are afraid to create something better because they don't know that it will be successful. And I think similarly around, rent stabilization, right? The things that came up in these elections, people are afraid of economic justice because they don't know what it'll lead to. This thing where developers get scared to develop in places that have rent stabilization or rent control policies. That's a fear that you won't be able to make money. And there is evidence that shows that you will be able to make money. Now, the rate at which you profit will be a lot less than if you could raise that rent 12%, 7%. But it also means that more people will have the opportunity to be successful homeowners and renters, and communities will be stabilized. And again, you will still profit. And so I really encourage people to do their research and ask questions. When you don't understand why so many people want rent stabilization, ask questions. When you don't understand why nearly half of the city voted to change our public safety program, right? Like, if you don't understand that, ask questions. People have experiences that are not like yours. And we all deserve a system that we pay for. Our taxes go to the system. We all deserve to have it work for us and not worry that our lives or the lives of those that we love will be taken.
And I think another point is, every community is not a monolith. And I think that's something that I see specifically here in Minnesota is, if a group of activists, say Black activists, say to abolish the police, that is representative of all the Black people in the state, right? What I really encourage, our allies to really think about, and even some of our own community, we are not a monolith. I think that the solutions, we may not always agree on the solutions, but we are all working towards the same outcome. So if we can make some space, I think to your point, to hear each other and try to find like, okay, what is the outcome you're looking for? Oh, I'm actually looking for that same outcome. We just may disagree on the pathway to get there, but it's all important to get us where we're trying to go. And so one last point then bringing this all back to collective power, how would you like to see our neighborhoods take, like the example that you gave around a developer coming in? I have my own thoughts, but I'd love to hear your thoughts about a developer coming in, to provide some stabilized housing and that collective power, and community building with a developer that comes into your community.
Yeah, and there are folks that are really doing this work. But really it's, if you're coming into a community, do you have community advisors, folks that are living in that community that can help guide and direct your development, help inform that process, partnering with both individuals and actual community-based organizations to do that work, and not being afraid, again, not letting fear drive you leaning away from that, right? It's like, yes, maybe the communication styles will be different. I mean, I don't know what people fear about having conversations with humans, but
A lot.
yeah, I mean, they do. There's a lot. But I think that, it's like people will support you when they know that you're coming in with the intention of providing something for the community, and you're willing to listen to the community about how to do that. Trust is built just in that. And so people will support the project. And I agree that, communities are not a monolith, and there is mad nuance to all of us through just our humanity. And so the way we go is we go together with humility and listening.
Beautiful. Perfect segue. Thank you so much. I'm going to thank you again for just sharing, being here, presence, your love, your light, your amazingness, and just sending these ripples out, the ripples of change out, and making help working with our communities to get them where they want to go. So thank you so much. We are going to take a few minutes now at this time to transition to our next speaker, Alicia D Smith. So folks need to stretch, grab something to eat, please do so. We'll start again at 6:50. Thank you again, a Sole Sol. I really appreciate all the work that you're doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was amazing. Mm-mm-mm. All right, I think we're going to go ahead and jump back to it. Thanks so much for sticking with us through this short break. I'm so excited to introduce our next speaker, Alicia D Smith. Before I do, I just want to remind everyone that following this conversation with Alicia, we will have time to answer some more audience questions. So as we're talking, if anything sparks your curiosity, please share your questions in the chat and we'll do our best to get them during our question and answer time. Now, without further ado, it is my distinct privilege to introduce to you Alicia D Smith. Alicia is the Executive Director of the Corcoran Neighborhood Association and newly elected at-large Commissioner of the Minneapolis Parks Board. Woo! Can we get a what?
Yes.
And yes, honey, yes. And she describes herself as a lifelong community builder. Again, rather than reading her bio out loud, I'll ask Alicia to introduce herself to us. Alicia, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Well, you know me, I'm just a regular old Jane out here. But no, I am by far my most favorite title is mom. I have two super amazing and annoying and amazing all at the same time little boys who are 8 and 12. And so I think they're at the peak of their annoying one another, which then annoys me because then someone always comes like to tattle on another one. But I love them. They're fun, but yet their energy is unmatched. So that by far is my favorite title to wear. But then I also work over at the Corcoran Neighborhood Organization as the executive director. And I am working with a new group called SJB, which is helping to eradicate homelessness as we talk about homelessness and the direct connection to addiction. And so that's super exciting, as well as any other cause that is calling to help uplift the people from this sort of space of deficiency that we find ourselves in as a result of systemic and continuous oppression, whether that be from the system here locally or from our federal systems. So any call that I may answer in terms of building community, that also excites me, on top of randomly trying to pretend that I know how to coach boys football just so I can get really good pictures of all the kids to send to the other moms. That's really how you get the good photo. So I'm that mom that's like, oh yeah, I'm sorry to be the assistant. No idea what I'm doing, but I'm getting great footage. So those are, that's a little bit about me. And yes, I was just elected to the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board as the new at-large commissioner, one of three. So I'm super excited and honored and overwhelmingly thankful to the people of Minneapolis that chose to cast their vote for me. And for those folks who maybe didn't know about me, I'm excited to win them over and pull in their kind of input to make our parks better and truly like see growth across all of our parks, no matter what part of the city we're in. So I'm really excited. And I'm even more excited because I get the distinct pleasure of being the only woman of color and the only person of color on the board, which is really interesting given like where we are as a city. So I will wear that and carry that proudly as I attempt to bring the voice of all of us as we make decision as a board. So.
And I want to follow up on that. We're going to talk about your work, but I'd love for you to talk about the journey of you deciding to run, right? What were the conversations you had to have with yourself, with your family? We're definitely seeing record number of first-time people coming into the elected space. And I think we need more, especially people with sense.
Yeah.
There seems to be a run of people who ain't got no sense who are running. So would love for you to share more about what was your thought process? What was the impetus, and maybe a little bit about what you went through that process to get finally elected?
Yeah, so like the conversation I first had to have was with like my sons who are avid actors and all things little humans that kids can do. My kids are like, oh yeah, there's an event happening, we should be in that. Oh, there's something happening. So I had to like talk through like our schedules may alter a little bit. I may miss a practice, I might miss a game, and then like figure out where would they compromise and share their mom even more outside of the last 18 months that they've been really gracious about like going to meetings and helping out at a food show or going to marches and going to rallies and going to way too many meetings for children, but they have been extremely flexible and extended a lot of grace. So it really was about talking to my family to say, hey, this is what I'm going to do. And here's why I feel called to do it right now. And I'm reacting in the sense of that I'm receiving an overwhelming number of requests and calls from families that I either once served, continue to serve today, that are saying like, what are we doing? Like, where do we go, Miss Alicia? I don't know what to do. School is closed. Everything's closed. My kid is being tempted by things that I don't want them tempted by. And really having no alternative outlet to direct folks to was really hard for me, because I am a problem solver and I'm a village kid. So I always had something to do. Like it was always, we could always go to the park or go to like the community center. There was always a space that we can go to. Nothing ever shut down an entire community the way that we saw COVID shut down the world. And so that was really the push that drove me. And so what I did, I ended up having to talk to my board, of course, because as a neighborhood executive director, you report to a board, and ensuring that there were no conflicts of interest, and where they were, that we would navigate those landmarks, like those landmines together. And so my board was like overly supportive, like, yes, hurry up. Like they couldn't encourage me anymore. In fact, many of them was like, are you sure parks are like, could we not push you to do something else? City council, like there are areas where we could see some of this that we would like to see go. And so the parks were my place, just because like as a mother right now to two really active small humans, that was a really big deal for me. And knowing that like there are so many other young people that I know that I'm connected to, and that families continue to bring forth, that it's important that you have an ally and an advocate who is willing to go the distance and understand that while we as adults may be able to compromise, there are certain ways that you will never be able to compromise with children and their mental and physical like space and health that they need in order to recreate or to be engaged. And even with some of our seniors, where we saw where there is this kind of parallel behavior in terms of like needing outlets and being socially isolated and not having people to talk to for almost 2 years. And so that was a lot of what I went through. And then just really like talking it out with community members and removing myself from certain committees in the community that, directly impacted or made decisions related to park board stuff. So that was kind of my whole process. Running a citywide campaign was absolutely nuts, bananas, crazy, all of those things, because it's like you're running for like a mayor's position, but you're not. You're like, I'm talking about park board. And then you get lots of people who are like, what? The parks are up? What? Okay, I can't even focus on the parks right now because I can't get past the mayor and I can't get past city council. And so helping people see the importance of all of those things and understanding that like with a new wave of leadership, how we can see the interconnectedness and the interworkings of intergovernmental partnership, very intentional when you talk about new leadership coming on. And so it was really important for me to get to know other candidates that were running in different races, to even get to know the candidates that you can say that I was running against, but I operated my race like I was running against no one. Like really, I was just talking about the things that were important to me and the things that I was overwhelmingly hearing in community. And so that made it a lot smoother for me in terms of just how I navigated, because I was working with district candidates. I was also partnering with other candidates who were running for city council and talking with candidates who were running for mayor. And so being really intentional to say like, hey, if you're elected, like, here's what I think will be really important. And here's how I think we can have devastating impact on the system, given like, if we only talk about Minneapolis since March until now, the amount of change that has to happen and how fast it needs to happen. We are not in a place where you all were talking about being patient. We are beyond that. Like, the alarms have been going off. We are beyond a state of emergency. Like right now, we either do it now or we won't. And so that was really exciting and very hard. So like the night of the election, like I had not slept. The last time I had been in my bed was Friday prior to the election. And we were out like 2, 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. We're on every side of the city, like flyering, harassing people like who are going to work on the city bus. Like, hey, where are you going? Oh, going to work. What are you doing out here? Oh, I'm flying. I'm running for office. Why are you outside at this time? Because you're outside at this time. And I'm really trying to be engaged with every single element of our community. And so you can't afford to miss out on any of those opportunities. And so that was really important and way harder than I ever thought. So like the day after the election, I was like, oh, I'm going to be able to relax. And then I remember I had committed to like young people that I would do this retreat with them. And then I was like, yep, I'm never going to sleep. My life is over. It's like having a new baby. You maybe get a 5-minute break here or there. So it's been really good. I'm super excited. And I look forward to like genuinely bringing the voice of the people to the park board and like being intentional about building those relationships across the agencies like that. If nothing else comes of my term, is that we build and establish actual relationships, working ones, healthy ones with each other who are making decisions on behalf of this collective city.
Yes, and I can empathize with you a little bit. So every year I'm an election judge, so at least in the midterms as well as the big elections, and our day starts at 5:30 and we end at 9:30 at night. So I have a little bit of, I can empathize. I got a little bit of empathy for you. I have a lot of empathy for you, but I have a little bit of understanding of what you might be going through. So one more question on this before we get into your actual day-to-day job. What is the park's budget, and what do you imagine that you would like to see in your tenure there on the parks board?
Well, the budget will change a little bit. So, they just rolled out the budget 2 weeks ago. And so there'll be some changes based on feedback and input from staff. What I really would like to see us do is to hone up on some of our, not only our youth programming, but also think about intergenerationally how we tap into community and really see an improvement in the parks where currently right now, if you look at just the disparity between a North Commons and a Phelps, it's dramatically different, right? Some will say they're similar because of proximity to the square and the sheer amount of crime that's been happening across the city. But I would tell you that there are like literally families that live across the street from North Commons that will never go there as long as we are in the current state that we are in. And there are families that live across the street from Phelps that'll say, oh, it's totally fine until it gets dark. And so moving into a space where we have parks on all sides of our city that have some of these very standard and basic, high quality, high functioning, not only staff, but equipment, programming, and that the buildings are catered to in a way that paint isn't chipping, the floors are being cared for, the grass is being cut, these things that like we take for granted that are sort of cosmetic, but are really important to people when you think about frequenting your local park. If you don't have a vehicle and you don't travel much outside of your neighborhood, your local park becomes your sanctuary. And for me, that's really important. And so one of the selfish things that I was telling everyone as I was running, when people were like, well, what's your agenda? Well, my agenda is the people's agenda. And we're talking about people, program, and safety, right? Like those were the 3 overarching themes. But my personal, like selfish motivation, and one thing I want to work on is the retention and the succession planning of the staff. Coming from my background at the Y, one of the biggest things that I did at the Y in my tenure there was build ladders of leadership, not only from young people, but from young professionals who saw themselves long-term in these roles that then become invested, right? So now it's no longer about a job. Now you're like, these people are crazy. They pay me to come here and do this. I'd be here every day if I could be here for free and know that like I can still keep a roof over my head and food in my belly, right? Like if our basic needs are met, many of us will follow our passion. And so oftentimes people who are passionate about like youth development, recreation, nature, and those things, when we think about our parks, oftentimes we're losing those really great people to other systems, not only because of pay, but because of the culture. And so that's like one selfish thing that I want to get tied in with the staff to figure out how do we change the culture of the park so that you have staff in a park, in your local park that you've seen, like you maybe started there as like picking up leaves at 14 as like a little junior staff. And then you maybe go away to college or, you know, try some other things and come back. And now you remember all these really cool things you did as a young person in this park. And now you are this professional delivering these same services. And so I think that's like kind of like my own secret, like, yes, I want to do this, not so secret, but like what I'm really excited about outside of the things that I'm hearing from people in community when we talk about the programming of the parks and just the structure of our parks. I know that lots of people want to see new structures go up, new amenities. I don't think that we're just in that place right now. I think that we need to focus on what we already have and get them up to a high quality standard of operation and also a high quality standard of functionality.
Yeah, and I what I love about what you're saying is that it really emphasizes something that I talk about a lot, which is the politics and the policies that happen at the federal level. You're not going to really see in your daily life. It's what's happening in your community. It's those electeds like the parks commissioners. It's the electeds like your city council. Those are the things that are going to impact you every day. If a park closes, that was a local decision. That was not a national decision. Rent stabilization, that's a local decision. That is not a federal decision, right? So going back to Soleil Sol's point about education, I think that while I realize, because I was that person of working 2 and 3 jobs, I was going to school and I had a little one myself, but we have to at least have some baseline education and understanding about who are those people, places, and things that will change my life. Who's in charge of my bus route? Who makes decisions about my bus route? Or where if I pay attention to nothing else, I need to pay attention to who manages my bus route, right? Where is it going? How is it changing? Like, right? Those are the things we need to worry about. Well, I want to shift gears now, but I love that whole concept of ladders of leadership. It's something that we practice as Social Impact Strategies Group. Everybody has a professional development plan, and not in the traditional HR sense of a professional development plan. I tell my team, I want you to pick 3 goals. Only one of them has to be professional. The other 2 can be personal. They can all be professional, but at least one of them has to be professional. The other 2 can be a combination of the 2. And I check in with them quarterly to see how are you tracking, because I know that even their personal goals are going to help them be better at the job. They're going to be happier at the job. They're going to do better at their job. So I think, and to Soleil Sol's point of, we budget for that as well. There's money behind to support them to do that.
Absolutely, Elaine. I think that, let me just add this. I think that you're right. Like, I think that when we talk about professional development or succession planning, sometimes we selfishly, when we work for organizations or corporations and we're building these brands, we think only internally, but sometimes it takes, you may have someone who's really fantastic. And guess what? The why may not be the place, or corporate may not be the place, but Target Foundation may be their bread and butter. And if you help them navigate to get to where they need to be, the amount of like output that you'll get from them totally changes, because then now they're saying, oh, Elaine, you care about me like here while I'm working, and when I maybe go work over here. It makes it real. And I think that's what we oftentimes forget, is that we have to care about the total person. And that's always been my type of leadership, is that I'm not only invested in my staff when you come and clock in here, but I'm invested in you outside of work, because your mental health, your physical safety, all of those things matter, because it impacts how you show up. Like if your cat died and this has been your baby and like you're at work and I'm like, well, something is off and I don't know. And then we finally figure out and it's like, well, how insensitive are we? Like I could have stepped in and did something like while you go home and sort of process what's going on.
Absolutely, right. And what I've experienced is there's a return on investment. One of my staff who came on, they stayed with me for 3 years. They are responsible for having more consulting work come my way, not only from their organization, but they've made referral. So the fact that I invested in that person, they've paid it back like multiple times, right? So I think sometimes we get caught up in there's not, particularly with nonprofits, right? We don't have enough money, we don't have budget, but what's the cost if you don't do that, right? What's the price you pay? What's the burnout? What's
Absolutely.
the turnaround that you're having somebody come in and out of the position, because sometimes there's more money for that than you have for a salary. You're like, listen, I can't pay you what 3M is going to pay. But here's what I can tell you. I will invest in you and you want a class, you want a workshop, you want Coursera, you want to go to this conference, you want like I can swing that. I can do some what is one of my friends say, personalized accounting to make that, make that happen. But I want to switch gears here and really kind of get back into the work that you're doing. You were involved in supporting tenants of the Sky Without Limits Cooperative and in the neighborhood. Can you tell us more about your role in the campaign and how did the campaign achieve real positive wins in people's lives? And what did it take for the campaign to be successful? I know that's a loaded lot to take in.
Okay, I'll start here. My role, really simple. Like I was showing up in a formal and informal capacity because there are many a times where like these meetings have to happen and they're not going to happen in this box of like, oh, it's 9 to 5, but sometimes it's like 8 o'clock at night or it's 11 o'clock on a Zoom call. Like, hey, Alicia, you have time to just like be a thought partner. Heck yeah, I do. Hang on 1 second. Let me get my phone. Let's dial in. And so really just offering not just camaraderie, but then also offering strategy and being an ear, a sounding board to say, okay, have we thought about this? But also like, how do we engage people who may not have traditionally seen themselves as activists, right? Or freedom fighters in this regard. And so it was lots of different ways in which I was engaged. Sometimes I just show up and I'm there and I'm adding input. Sometimes it's like, hey, can you sit in and help lead this group with this other individual? Heck yeah, I certainly can. I don't mind because I think that it's all of our responsibilities. This wasn't just the responsibility of the residents or of IX, who was the lead agency sort of navigating this with the tenants, but it was something that was important for all of us as a collective people, and particularly when we're talking about something so critical and important as housing. Like that is absolutely a human right that we somehow have minimized and sort of said like, oh, well, if these people don't have housing, it's something they did, not recognizing that we're falling short in many ways. And so my work there was really about supporting the leadership of IX, but also building individual relationships with tenants and helping them like process and figure out like, how do they exercise and find strength in their voice and in their story. And it is such a diverse group of residents. Like every type of human lives in those 5 apartment buildings, right? And they're all like really close in proximity. And many of them had not really had personal relationships. And so sometimes we'd be at a block party or just a party in like their headquarters where IX's office, or even like squeezing folks in our small office over here. Like, how do we build these relationships? Because we're all fighting for the same thing. The goal is for everyone to retain housing in a place where people have made their homes. And I met renters in these buildings have been there for 32 years. And I'm just like mind blown that like you've lived in the same place for 32 years as a renter. You've reared your family here. Like there are families that have reared their children in this neighborhood and have seen, you know, the ebbs and flows of the neighborhood, the good, the bad, the indifferent. And so like there was such strength in the individuals in that building, in the buildings, they didn't even recognize their own strength. And like, it was just like, they had been shy, right? And some of them was concerned around safety in terms of the system and how the landlord was playing dirty tricks. And at one point, someone had threatened to call like ICE when ICE was rolling around in Minneapolis, like trying to intimidate the tenants, those who maybe had some questions or working through their immigration status. And so every tactic that was humanly possible was used to deter these folks. And like, they remain unwavered. And I think that community showed up so big for them. It was just kind of like, you can do this, you know, like you're in the last minute of the game. It's like, you're tired. You're like, I'm done. The game is over. There's no way we're coming back. Yeah. Right? We don't have anybody that can hit the three right now. Like, we just got to figure it out. But it was just reinvigorating. So like, it was about pulling in other community members who maybe were on the further side of the neighborhood that maybe had only heard about these things, but had no real connection to the fact that this were their neighbors. And so that was really critical. And something that was really amazing that happened is that we began to talk about racism and white supremacy in a way that many of our immigrant brothers and sisters don't see, because oftentimes their lenses, that isn't their lens. And so we're at a protest one day, and the sister Vanessa said something, and she said white supremacy, and I go, I know she said white supremacy because my Spanish isn't that great, but I'm telling you, I know what she said. And so it just kind of opened their minds a little bit, right? And then we even start to get into like this anti-Blackness and what that means, in particular, because I'm showing up as a Black woman. There were other Black women leaders, Chloe Jackson, who is by far one of their like poster childs for this movement and one of their lead organizers in just fighting for fair housing for everyone. And so like we begin to talk about these like passive aggressive ways and tools that these folks were using that they didn't mean to harm their neighbor, or they didn't mean any disrespect or mean to be excluding certain groups of folks, but they were. And so it was just such riveting dialogue and such eye-opening experiences. And now you can take any of the 65 residents who are part of this movement, and they can lead a protest of thousands of people, right? They can lead you down anyway and tell you the mission. They practice cheers, they practice chants, there was block parties, everything. Like we literally was doing everything together and building that camaraderie. And it was by far the most natural and organic type of movement that I've been a part of when you think about fighting for housing. Like we know this happens when we can think about like police brutality and wages, like we get that, but housing becomes such a touchy issue for folks that you don't see this type of movement happening, because it's like, well, I have a little bit more over here. So like, this is why I'm advocating for you. And then I have a little bit less. Hang on one second, because Pastor Kerman is in my office.
Okay. That's okay. I want to buy you some time. One of the things we talk about, I think what I'm hearing from Alicia is one of the things we talk about in conflict resolution is if you speak from your experience can't be denied because it's your experience. Right. Yeah. And one of the things that I talk about, in particularly my work has to do with finance, which is predicated on white supremacy and all of the things, right? Of like, this is my experience, and I am not the only one who has this experience. So if this is my experience, what now? Do you want to continue my experience? Do you want others to continue my experience? Or what's that line in the sand? The other thing that I learned that has been really powerful for me in doing the work, doing this work is one of my mentors was really great. My facilitation mediation mentor, she said, when you think you know the answer, ask a question.
Yeah.
And I found that's been so powerful, right? Because what it does is, and it literally, I was telling this to one of my staff yesterday, she was talking with a client. She's like, how do I get them to see that they're the problem? and I said, and we're helping shift their business to a cooperative, and the person is a micromanager, control freak. And so I said, ask a question, like, the answer, but ask a question. And the question could be, So how does you doing that lend itself to a cooperative? I think you've got to, I think all too often we try to make the case for somebody and instead of having them do the labor to walk through it themselves.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So because it's going to click and it's going to be internalized way more than anything that I could say. Let them work through it. Right.
Yes.
I'm tired. I don't need any more work. Right.
That's it. That's it. Yes.
Right. But in your work, I'm sure you had to deal with a lot of tensions, and it sounded like there were some tensions in those situations. Talk a little bit more about maybe what were some of the practical things, considering the large diversity that you had to deal with, and everybody's not on the same page. What are some real concrete things that maybe people watching this can take away that they can bring either into their activist work or even to their work lives or their personal lives that you have found have been tips and tricks, or not tricks, I don't want to call them tricks, but tips to be able to navigate and move past some of these tensions?
Well, I think one of the most important points of moving past some of the tension, not necessarily that we work through it right away, right? We're still working through a lot of this, but to acknowledge and to speak truth to power, to say, hey, here is my truth. Here is why I'm afraid when I see these group of people walk in a building that I know don't live there, but they could be visiting you. And so I get freaked out and then I'm like locking the door versus letting them in or whatever. And so part of it was our leaders, our tenant leaders, Chloe, who I mentioned, and Vanessa, Chloe being a Black woman, and then Vanessa, I believe is Ecuadorian. And so they work so closely together, even though Vanessa spoke very little English, like their love and their connections like was well beyond the spoken word. Like it was just, you could see it in the air. Like it was just like, oh no, okay, I got it. And it was just something that was just like beyond words, the way that they would communicate and play off of one another. And it helped that the leaders of IX were doing a lot of translating. And when there were these points of tension, that we'd have these sort of separate conversations to say, hey, here's what happened, and here's what people are feeling. And then to go in and to explain that and speak it in your native language, right? So that you understand it and then be able to communicate back like, well, here's what I meant, or yes, I meant that, and here's why I believe this to be true. It doesn't erase your truth. It just says that when you believe this, you hurt these people. And because you have two people like Chloe and Vanessa, who essentially the trial really rested on these two individuals because their two cases were up first out of the 65 tenants in the court, was just like, whatever issue I know I'm wrestling with in terms of like anti-Blackness and what has been taught to me, I know that this woman here is the key to me staying in my home. And so if nothing else, I like this Black woman. And that's enough of a conversation piece to talk through some of that. And so it became personal, it became relational. And so when we talk about conflict, it's not always bad. It definitely opens up for dialogue to say, well, let me challenge how you think about that, because I also maybe heard this about your people, which isn't true. And so we don't want to start to throw these accusations and thoughts around without having a context and creating a safe space to have these conversations. And so that was really big, was that like leadership would get together to say, hey, here's what I'm struggling with because here's what was said. And it may not have been meant this way, but here's how I received it. And so a big part of that was about having those small group conversations and having that core leadership team be open to having the dialogue, no matter how uncomfortable it was, for whether it was about all of the meetings always happening in Spanish and being translated for the three of us that didn't speak Spanish, which is just like, well, what did he say? Wait, what? Like, I caught that piece, but I don't understand. And so you're always like reminded, like, okay, we're in the minority here in this space, as well as when we go out here. But then when we go to court, the judge is speaking directly to me. And then now you have to be translated, and you have to hope that I'm fighting with the same tenacity for my family to be here to benefit your family. And so it's still a challenge that we're working through. You don't just get over this stuff, but you certainly become more comfortable with having the dialogue and pushing those boundaries to say, listen, that's not true. You can't make broad sweeping statements about communities the same way we don't want people making broad sweeping statements about you, the same way that we're tackling the fact that we still live in a majority white neighborhood while these apartment complexes may be dominated in terms of sheer numbers by people of color. The homeowners around us don't look like us, and they look like our neighbor Sean, our neighbor John, or Joe down the street. These are the neighbors, and we have to get them bought in to see the value not only in you, but the value in the stability that you bring to the neighborhood, especially when you think about people renting and staying in community and building community over 30 years. It wasn't just one renter that was there for 20 or 30 years. Like, this was dozens of people who had raised their families here, so they were an important part of the community that other people didn't even know. Like, your kids went to South and you were invested, you pick up trash in this neighborhood just like the folks who own the homes. And so I think that becomes the centerpiece of how we get over how we get through some of those difficult situations or instances where there was some misunderstanding, in particular when we talk about race. Like, there is a misunderstanding internally within communities of color as well. There's definitely a hierarchy, right? Which is how I don't know who came up with this term of the oppression of Olympics, but that is so real. Like, it's just like, nobody wants to be Black, right? So like, you cool, you love the Black people, yeah, Black Lives Matter, but baby, I don't want to be those folks. I will call them when we want someone to fight with us, but you don't want to be those folks, right? And so there is this thing of like, well, my proximity to whiteness, but that's what white supremacy tells you, is that like, the closer you are, the better you are. Not realizing that, hey, we could build collective power and it's just be about us and not compare ourselves to anyone else.
Well, and we only have time for one more question, and I'm going to ask you the same question I ask Asale Sol, which is, what do you do for self-care?
For self-care, I laugh a lot. I'm a smiler.
I thought you might. I thought you might.
And I'm extremely just silly. Like, I'm still very young at heart. And having two small boys, there's literally nothing that I could take so serious that I bring it home heavy on me. Because you walk in the door, you don't know if you're going to get shot with a Nerf gun or a ball thrown at you or a pair of dirty socks. It's impossible. And so I take it very serious that the work that I'm doing is really heavy, but when I get to go home or when I'm in community, not only with my kids, but other folks, just finding a moment of joy to connect with a person, and it be personal, not just, hey, Elaine, how you doing? How's work? No, how's your family? What's new? What did you do yesterday at 10:30? Did you watch this basketball game? I'm a big sports fan, so I'm watching sports. I'm trying to get into TV, but I am not winning the TV fight though. Just so y'all know, I'm working on it. But I did watch a new Netflix show, The Harder They Fall, about the Black Cowboys. That was ridiculously amazing. So I'm loving the fact that I have Netflix and I can do this. But that was
everything. That was everything. When I say everything, I've watched it twice already. That was everything. Everything.
Yeah, that's my self-care. Yes. Thank you for asking.
Thank you. No, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us, both of you. It has also been a pleasure speaking with you. I hope and know that people have taken away something from this conversation, multiple things. I've got pages of notes myself. I'm oh, yes, okay. But thank you so much for all the work that you are doing on the community. It's been wonderful to speak with you, and a big thank you to Asole Young. With that, I'm going to turn things back over to Tabitha or Christina? Ms. Tabitha, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Thank you again. So appreciate you. It's been my pleasure moderating this panel. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you so much,
Elaine.
Elaine. I mean, what an amazing, amazing start to our second annual Southside Summit. For all of you that's watching, for all of you that's home, I'm just going to take a minute and give it up for the amazing work that, and just really the conversation. I mean, Elaine, probably should have just threw you into the interview lineup, but what an amazing way for us to really hear and center powerful voices, the dynamism, the perspectives, the work that you're all doing. Thank you, thank you, thank you for leading the way. I mean, the first night we've heard from an entrepreneur, and we've heard from a community leader and leaders, and from an elected leader now in the role of an MPRB commissioner, to executive director roles that Asile So Young and Alicia D Smith serve for their organizations. We could not be more delighted. This is just me, some final comments to encourage folks to check us out on Friday. We will be live streaming in the same places, a little bit of a different time, for day 2 and the final day of our second annual Southside Summit. And we have an amazing lineup. We're going to have a new series of interviews with powerhouse people doing amazing work across environmental justice and arts organizing and public safety and everything in between, and really kind of centering the conversation around how do we move from not only coalition and collaboration and how that translates into campaigns and then legislation. And so I'm just going to run through the names really quickly because it warrants it. So Jasna Harris will be with us, and she's an activist and really a consultant in the environmental justice space. Shay Cage, which is a dynamic and powerful award-winning local artist, will be lending her voice to the conversation. Kanani Omar, who's holding it down with Minneapolis United for Rent Control and has been doing powerful work, which is why both cities was able to impart paths and take steps for rent stabilization in our community. Candace Montgomery, co-director, co-executive director over at Black Visions Collective, and helping to really elevate the idea that we could be different in community from a policing perspective. And then we're going to have another phenomenal moderator. Unfortunately, Elaine won't be back, but we'll have LaCora Bradford-Kesty holding us down for a dynamic conversation with the campaign manager for Keep St. Paul Home, which is our St. Paul affiliate of rent stabilization, Tram Hung, and then Angela Conley, who is our elected commissioner for District 4. It's going to be jam-packed, but worth it. We kick off at 10 a.m. We will go to around 2 p.m. And it will be an amazing time. So please check us out. Thank you again to Elaine Rasmussen, Asile So Young, Alicia D Smith, and the entire crew and team over at Powderhorn Park Neighborhood Association. Julia, Ashley, Christina, Hannah, you hold us down and you keep us going. So thank you, and thank you for being in this community. Appreciate you all. We'll see you on Friday.